as the word says, they were socialists.
Incredible, by the way. Incredible for any German to say this. It's like directly your history. I'm going to continue talking about the German elections, but we're going to take a step back and cover it from a historical approach. The approach is coming from Bestie Marx, friend of the show. Bestie Marx made a YouTube video tracing AfD's history back to Nazi Germany and how similar their policies were. We're gonna start off with this one. The video is called "The AfD's Nazi Connections Run Deeper Than You Think." 23-minute from Bestie Marx, and why it's so scary that the AfD actually gained a lot of seats and a lot of momentum in German politics.
Fight, fight!
I gotta pee.
The far-right AfD is surging. 1 in 5 Germans would now vote for them. Yet, while many insist the AfD are not Nazis, a more unsettling reality lurks just beneath the surface. The party thrives on the normalization of far-right ideology. And here's the real question. Have the seemingly anti-fascist liberal parties, through their own policies on migration, economic equality and foreign intervention, helped create the very conditions that fuel the AfD's rise?
Dass selbst ein Teil der Grünen inzwischen AfD-Position übernimmt. Das nennen wir eine Zeitenwende.
Today, we're breaking down the AfD's secret and not-so-secret connections to neo-Nazi structures, the role of mainstream politics in normalizing the far right, and why the AfD is only a symptom of something much deeper. Subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get into it. Before starting, I want to say a massive thank you to all those who support the channel on Patreon. All the research and editing takes up a huge amount of time, and your contributions make a huge difference. Every new Patreon matters, so check out the link in the description if you want to support this type of work. Thank you. In 2023, the Spiegel magazine uncovered a secret strategy meeting hosted by the AfD's youth wing, Junge Alternative, short JA. The exact location of the meeting remained secret for a long time. The invitation only mentioned a general area. The guests arrived discreetly. In late February, just over 50 people gathered at Hofrien in Uchte, Lower Saxony, to discuss the Roaring Twenties. One speaker was a certain Peter Steinbaum, former leader of the youth wing of the neo-Nazi party called NPD. Another speaker was Dominik Asch, a JA leader who often wears a Thor's hammer around his neck, and who gave a lecture on meta-politics, in which he explains how to occupy the pre-political space to shift German discourse to the right. The AfD has been talking about this strategy openly for a long time. So why the secrecy? To understand, we must go back to the beginnings. The emergence of the AfD was a direct product of the international financial market crisis in 2010. Founded in 2013 by neoliberal economists and conservative elites, the AfD was initially a response to the euro crisis, much like other far-right, so-called Eurosceptic organizations in Europe. These so-called professors opposed the EU bailouts, not because they disagreed with the disastrous measures imposed on more dependent European countries, but because they wanted to protect German capital from weaker economies like Greece. But as global capitalism continued to unravel after the shock, the AfD adapted. By 2015, with the arrival of refugees fleeing imperialist wars, the party clearly had shifted gears, embracing a racist rhetoric to redirect working-class anger away from the ruling class. It achieved quick success. The media and sections of the German bourgeoisie tolerated this shift, using the AfD to push politics further to the right. On March 25, 2010, Chancellor Angela Merkel said at an EU summit that she agreed to the first bailout package for Greece. The justification of her decision as "without alternative" became a widely used phrase and served as an inspiration for the name of the AfD. The emergence and growth of far-right politics reflects a broader crisis of hegemony. One historical example is, of course, the rise of the NSDAP during the hyperinflation in the 20s. These crises facilitate the bourgeoisie's
yourself, you disgusting terrorist sympathizer. I hope you know that this is, probably going to get you a site-wide ban. I would urge against it. It's not something that I'm, unfamiliar with. A lot of people say this to me all the time. But, you have an 8-year-old account. You've been on this platform since 2017, and now you just have a site-wide ban, Kind of seems silly to do, don't you think? Anyway, let's continue.
Blaming of minorities and the so-called far left for society's problems, directing anger away from the rich through constructing a narrative of national decline and racial purity. According to the commentator or Italian communist Antonio Gramsci's analyses, fascism emerges as a response to the dominant ideology's failure to pacify the working class through peaceful means, requiring openly authoritarian tools to crush proletarian movements to preserve the capitalist order. Quote, "It became clear after the war that it was impossible for the Italian bourgeoisie to go on ruling with a democratic system. For now, there's no need of this. Bourgeois democratic respectability is still a requirement to gain mainstream support. The AfD figure that represents that is the woman at the head of the German far-right party." Alice Weidel, or as a tweet called her, lesbian wine mom Hitler, is the co-leader of the AfD and her party's chancellor candidate for the coming elections, and the most popular one in Germany. The former investment banker who lives in Switzerland presents herself as a champion of the ordinary people, ranting against the so-called global elites, undermining German nationhood, while working with the rich herself.
Who else did that? In important periods, important time frames in German history, who else did an identical thing? Or they would rally the troops and talk about the average German working class that was getting f***ed over by groups that were undermining Germany from within, while also simultaneously working hand in glove with capital owners. In like the 30s, I can't seem to place my finger on it, but
We've talked about the exact same hypocrisy regarding Giorgia Meloni. Another glaring
bicycle bastard, what a name. Thank you for the 10 gift
double standard is her advocacy for traditional heterosexual relationships, despite being in a same-sex partnership with a Sri Lankan-born woman.
Ich bin nicht queer, sondern ich bin mit einer Frau verheiratet, die ich seit 20 Jahren kenne. Wir haben 2 gemeinsame Kinder.
On the topic of prison sentences for homosexuality, one AfD parliament member said we should do that in Germany too. But her main issue is, of course, immigration. Much like
I just Googled this Hitler bloke. Not good. Yeah, not good.
Other far-right racists, she described multiculturalism as a failed concept and warned of the Islamization of Germany, spreading replacement theory conspiracies, calling for a return to a Germany for Germans, dreaming of a fortress Europa. The former co-leader of the party alongside Weidel stated, "We must close the borders and then endure the cruel images." On the topic of migration, AfD politicians have put out statements reminiscent of the most Hitlerite of Hitlerites. We must, of course, dispose of such people. The refugee doesn't care at which border, Greek or German, he dies. The whole development we are witnessing right now, the creation of a mixed peoples to erase national identities, and with that, the surrender of sovereignty to the EU, is simply unbearable. And with this guy, it gets especially ugly. I have a vision now. If things go well in Germany, we will eventually have a kind of...
Guys, I'm gonna be honest, the vibes with this AfD party are not great. And also quite similar to that previous politician that I was talking about, this Adolf guy, also not great. Not good at all, it seems.
Of apartheid state, like in South Africa back then, where whites just somehow keep the rest in check. Once we finally get there, we'll line them all up against the wall, dig a pit, throw them all in, and dump quicklime on top. Now, hearing the word deportation over and over again might seem almost normalized in the former Hitler country, because it is.
Would you force them back to Syria?
Deportation ist ein Begriff, den wir überhaupt nicht verwenden. Das ist ein Nazi-Begriff und Zwangsdeportation gibt es für uns überhaupt nicht. Zum Schluss auch mit Abschiebung, natürlich. Das ist Teil des deutschen Rechtssystems, auch des europäischen Rechtssystems. Rückführung, Abschiebung. Abschiebung ist der fachliche Begriff bei der Polizei.
You don't like the word deportation because of its historical connotations, but whatever you call it, that's the reality for these people, isn't it?
Wenn Sie das Deportation nennen, hat das einen völlig falschen Zungenschlag. Das wollen wir nicht.
People forget that before the systemic mass extermination of Jewish people, the Nazis called for deportations to create a physically cleansed Germany, free of Jews, for instance, by deporting Jews out of their homes into ghettos and to drive them into Soviet territory. Although, needless to say, supporting genocide is also still normal for ruling German parties. Today, virtually all the major parties are in favor of deportations. According to liberal logic, if the center-left parties didn't argue for it, they would lose voters to the far right. So to them, stopping the far right means becoming the far right themselves. But also, they serve to create scapegoats such as migrants, anti-Semitic Muslims, and so-called cultural elites to direct anger away from those in power. The Greens and the SPD, despite their progressive anti-fascist branding, frame migration as a security issue, thus contributing to the dehumanization of migrants and reinforcing the narrative that they are a threat to social cohesion. This rhetoric not only legitimizes the AfD's xenophobic agenda, but also undermines solidarity among the working class, dividing it along ethnic lines. But, much like Italy's Giorgia Meloni, Alice Weidel is still the quote-unquote polished bourgeois democratic face of the AfD. So much so that neo-Nazis online call her a puppet and a traitor, especially after she said that Hitler was a communist.
Back then, during the Third Reich, the National Socialists, as the word says, they were socialists. Adolf Hitler considered... So. Yeah.
Incredible, by the way. Incredible for any German to say this. It's like directly your history. Okay? Yeah, Americans say this all the time, but Americans are stupid. It's very cool that Germans can be just as stupid as Americans. I love that. Actually, fantastic. Look her up. Her grandfather was a Nazi judge. Yeah. That's why she knows better. She's like, yeah, my grandfather, who was a Nazi, was a big socialist, loved socialism. They loved socialists so much they killed them, even within their ranks, and said socialism was a Jewish invention. You know, classic socialist stuff.
They nationalized industries like crazy.
Yes, absolutely. He was a communist.
They did not do that.
And he considered himself as a socialist.
What they'd like to see is another prominent AfD leader at the top. One who before Weidel became known internationally was the most famous AfD figure. And that man is waiting in the wings. Björn Höcke is a leading figure of the AfD and head of the party in Thüringen. Influenced by his anti-communist father, he began to work as a teacher after studying sports and history. In an NPD magazine, it's pretty much confirmed that he wrote articles under the pseudonym Landolf Ladig, praising the ideas of the NPD, glorifying the Nazi regime, claiming that foreign powers have been envious of the Germans' discipline, and spoke of a revolution brought closer by self-amplifying crisis dynamics. The identitarian system opposition must take the lead in this revolution to introduce the organic market economy based on racial biology. The publisher of the magazine is a close friend of Höcke, one certain Thorsten Heise, a current leader of the NPD and one of the most influential German far-right ideologues. The convicted neo-Nazi has organized skinhead concerts and Nazi gatherings. Following the Holocaust denier David Irving, Höcke stated in a letter that the air raids on Dresden in 1945 were a violation of international law, quote, "Never before in world history, and never afterward, were so many people moved from life to death in such a short time." Höcke had to promise his school administration that he would never again publicly express such views as a teacher. In 2010, at the commemoration of the Dresden bombings, he demonstrated alongside neo-Nazis. According to a former student, Höcke, as a teacher, repeatedly praised the work of Psychology of the Masses by Gustave Le Bon and often spoke about charisma, told stories of his grandfather's meeting with Adolf Hitler, and described Hitler's incredibly blue eyes as a central element of the Führer cult. He was fascinated by Nordic mythology and regularly wore a Mjölnir pendant around his neck. 2 years later, he called the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin a monument of shame, invoked the idea of a reversal of history, demanding that Germany stop its culture of remembrance and reclaim its identity. In speeches, he refers to a 1,000-year Germany.
I wonder what he's talking about. I'm a little confused. Like, what does he mean?
A phrase that reminds of Hitler's concept of the 1,000-year Reich and uses Nazi concepts like Lebensraum. His 2018 book includes passages eerily similar to the works of SS figures. I am convinced that the Germans' longing for a historical figure who will one day heal the wounds in the nation, overcome the divisions and put things in order is deeply rooted in our souls. In 2019, media reports began revealing that Höcke attended secret far-right meetings where he discussed plans for remigration, a euphemism for ethnic cleansing used by right-wing extremists. In a 2021 speech, he got fined 13,000 euros for using a forbidden Sturmabteilung slogan, Alles für Deutschland, everything for Germany. Just last year, he was banned again.
Yeah, he messed up. He was just alternative. It is pretty funny that these guys have to like operate within these liberal boundaries, but it's clear that like those liberal boundaries in terms of like free speech and whatnot, like restrictions on hate speech in general has not really stopped them, you know? Yeah, guardrails are made out of cardboard, exactly.
And for chanting the first part, encouraging the audience to reply with the rest. While the National Party leadership maintains a facade of respectability, Höcke is a direct link between AfD politics and hardcore neo-Nazi ideology. And this is very important to understand. Fascism is not something that wins or loses during one election. It is the result of a systemic shift over a long period of time. Take the CDU-CSU Conservative Party, for instance, which invoked the Brandmauer firewall against any cooperation with the AfD. But over time, they've been gradually softening this stance, and this year, the CDU has finally cooperated with the AfD in the parliament for the first time, a historic turning point, opening up the possibility to have a far-right party in the German government for the first time since World War II. Also, take the complicity of the liberal parties, which are ultimately constrained by their commitment to maintain the capitalist order, prioritizing economic stability and the interests of the bourgeoisie over the needs of marginalized groups, normalizing AfD discourse and shifting the Overton window further to the right. The SPD during the Weimar Republic, which had positioned itself as a defender of the working class, repeatedly compromised with conservative forces to maintain political stability, as seen in the SPD's collaboration in suppressing the revolutionary movement by collaborating with fascists, and its support for austerity measures during the Great Depression.
Yep.
And enough has been said about the centrist party's role during that time. The main report at the 7th World Congress of the Comintern in the 30s put it very well. Quote, Before the establishment of a fascist dictatorship, bourgeois governments usually pass through a number of preliminary stages and adopt a number of reactionary measures which directly facilitate the accession to power of fascism. Whoever does not fight the reactionary measures of the bourgeoisie and the growth of fascism at these preparatory stages is not in a position to prevent the victory of fascism, but on the contrary, facilitates that victory. However, believe it or not, Höcke is still just the so-called moderate wing compared to other members of the AfD, slowly but surely gaining more and more influence in the emerging party. Publicly, the AfD tries to maintain distance from neo-Nazi organizations. When the NPD encouraged its supporters to vote AfD, the party quickly distanced itself. While the Communist Party of Germany was quickly banned by the post-war West German government, the NPD was left untouched and remains so to this day. It emerged out of a Nazi organization whose members defaced synagogues with swastikas and demanded that Jews...
That's interesting. Real interesting. How odd. The Communist Party was banned, still is, but the Nationalist Party is not.
Jews leave Germany. The AfD has a so-called incompatibility list on paper. But evidence tells a different story, making this list meaningless. Let's talk about some of these isolated cases which seem to happen over and over again. One such case is Andreas Kalbitz, once one of the AfD's most powerful figures. He attended neo-Nazi marches and even a gathering of a banned group linked to the Hitler Youth. The AfD kicked him out, not for his ideology, but as a strategic move to avoid scrutiny. Yet, he still holds a seat in Brandenburg's state parliament under the AfD faction. In one speech, he said openly what others don't dare to do. Quote, "The AfD is the last evolutionary chance of this country. After that, it's just helmets on." But these so-called isolated cases are anything but rare. Studies show that the AfD gained traction where the NPD was strong. It is argued that the open Nazi party laid the groundwork for the AfD's normalization. Behind the scenes, AfD parliamentary offices have hired former NPD candidates and individuals from banned organizations. And these guys are not just at the bottom, but linked to the leadership. Quote, "We differ from the NPD primarily through our bourgeois support base, not so much in terms of content." But it doesn't stop there. One former NPD member who worked as a staffer for the AfD is Marcel Grauf. He's known for having said the following things. "I so desperately wish for a civil war and millions of dead. Women, children, I don't care. It would be so beautiful. I want to piss on corpses and dance on graves. Sieg Heil." At least we now have so many foreigners in the country that a Holocaust would be worthwhile again. The fact that they generally tend to subhuman behavior is already due to their race. This, surprise surprise, was of course not an isolated case. Another Hitlerite hired by an AfD deputy is convicted neo-Nazi Mario Müller. In Brandenburg, the AfD faction's top candidate was active in the Spreelichter, a group banned in 2012 for its neo-Nazi ideology. These are just a few examples out of many. AfD youth members have been photographed training in combat sports with members of banned Nazi groups. When confronted, the AfD brushed it off as just, quote, "a normal sports club." What is considered normal to many Germans has been shown to be open Nazism and genocide in history already. The fascist movement does not need to win in government in order to find the danger of the workers' movement. Much like in Italy, where the fasci fought proletarian power to defend private property, the far right today utilizes the threat of the strengthening of left-wing extremism to legitimize support. Quote, "Take the left-wing extremist threat seriously and participate in all possible measures to finally rid the German national body of this tumor. Those bastard Antifa kids of stoned parents should be threatened that next time they'll end up underground. Deport Antifa to Buchenwald, work instead of left-wing terror." The Nazis viewed communists as their main political enemies, and many were among the first detainees in concentration camps.
Yep.
The Bolshevik threat was used by Hitler to centralize state power. While communist organizing is weak at the moment,
the ironic part about this, by the way, is that there are still liberals who look to that and say, and that's why, because the left went too extreme, that the Nazis rose to power. This is a common argument that I hear from liberals in, 2024 and 2023. This is a common argument that I had heard from liberals over and over again, which is so insane because you're assuming the role of historic liberalism that straight up was wrong after the fact.
There is no need to institute a fascist system and undermine formal bourgeois freedoms. But the international progressive and communist movement is growing, and the threat of fascism grows in a dialectical relationship to it. Quote, in short, democracy organized fascism when it felt it could no longer resist the pressure of the working class in conditions even of only formal freedom.
When your mass movement becomes big, and then they will try to suppress you, they will come out with fascism. So before you can have socialism, the monopoly capitalist class will unleash fascism under various pretexts. They use chauvinism against immigrants, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and also many other tricks just to hide the roots of the crisis.
As the contradictions of the imperialist system deepen, poverty, climate change, and war continue to drive mass migration, consequences of a global system of exploitation that overwhelmingly benefits capitalists in wealthy nations. Just as they failed a century ago, liberal parties today are incapable of stopping the rise of fascism when they themselves facilitate its rise. What's needed is a movement that stands in defense of the exploited and marginalized. Fascism may not take full control in the immediate future, but it doesn't have to. The fascist movement is already growing, while the liberal capitalist order, just as it is right now, is more than enough of a catastrophe, destroying the planet, impoverishing the working class, and enabling genocide. The time to organize is now, before it's too late.
Relevant threat. The AfD is set to come second and stay out of government, but by pushing anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and anti-Palestinian laws to be the political forefront, the AfD has already mainstreamed this agenda and changed the country, forming Staatsraj. I can't say that. The right has pushed the boundaries of what is acceptable, manipulating Germany's culture of atonement into a commitment to defend Israel at all costs, no matter how extreme its actions. This proxy nationalism is defended by an unholy alliance of the right, left, and center. $10 only. Sheesh. What are you talking about? Oh, donors on the video. So this is something that I talked about. This is something that I talked about with Donald Trump. If you remember in that Newsweek article that came out before the election, where I was talking about how sad I was about the election, regardless of whether Kamala Harris wins or loses, that Donald Trump had successfully undermined American politics, or rather destroyed it and then rebuilt it in his own image. This is precisely what's happening with the AfD in Germany. The AfD is also gaining a lot more momentum in this process, but they are simultaneously bringing all the center parties further and further to the right. Center parties, seeing the growth of the AfD, out of fear that the AfD might actually seize power, are basically doing their very best to take on a lot of the right-wing positions of the AfD in an effort to say, hey, you don't need to go to the alternative. We are the alternative. Now, of course, not realizing what happens in that process, I, as an American, am very familiar with this. You become, if you're not the alternative and you become the AfD yourself, is that a good thing? Is that actually a good thing? Like what? You're just going to manage fascism in a more technocratic approach? Is that what it is? And that's the problem, because that process, unironically also, makes people more open-minded to the real thing. The AfD didn't pioneer this idea that anti-Semitism is left-wing, but they jumped on it at the perfect time. The AfD made this explicitly political. They pioneered this as a political weapon within the parliamentary framework with the first draft of the BDS resolution. Germany has been stuck with what Hans Kundani calls Zionist McCarthyism, which we have here in the United States of America as well. The cancellation of events, funding, media campaigns, and police brutality regularly administered to those who criticize Israel's occupation of Palestine and the brutal war in Gaza. The AfD used this. They are utilizing Zionism as a very effective censorship tool. This is what right-wing parties do. The Republican Party is doing the same thing. After years and years of advocating for Nazis to directly march on college campuses and making that the forefront of their political movement, Republicans so quickly turned around and was like, no, anti-Semitism is a major problem in college campuses. We have to create an anti-Semitism task force. Ironically enough, of course, the anti-Semitism task force will obviously target Jewish anti-fascists as well as anti-fascists of every other background. Because for them, it has nothing to do with anti-fascism. Of course, I mean, it has nothing to do with, it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism and everything to do with destroying your enemies in a way that even liberals will look at in a permissible way. Okay? They are building the machinery of censorship in an effort to squash all matter of momentum. Okay? They want to make sure that they just stop all dissent, really. Look no further than the insane 501c3 bill that the Republicans tried to pass and Democrats voted to pass initially in Congress. They wanted to make it so that Trump was the incoming president. Democrats knew this. And in that lame duck period, Democrats who were pro-Israel, okay, Democrats who are pro-Israel literally voted to give the Trump department, the Trump Treasury, awesome powers to decide any and every 501c3 group. Any 501c3 group is actually a terrorist group. The funniest thing just happened to me. Look at what I'm quote retweeting now. What? Bernie and his wife skimmed millions from his 2 presidential campaign. Oh, he got quote retweeted by Roger Stone. Bernie and his wife skimmed millions from his 2 presidential campaign. He's an obnoxious, honking loudmouth and a hypocrite. He's driving a top-of-the-line Mercedes and has multiple vacation homes. Kash Patel should do a deep dive on Bernie's finances, and then Bernie could have a federal vacation. Anything just to shut him the up. I hate these people so much. I just joined Die Linke and getting involved in political activism, even though my rough German as is. The DE coverage is helping tremendously in getting caught up to speed. Much love. Hell yeah. I mean, they're just like openly and actively saying like we should jail Bernie Sanders. That's crazy. Those surprised or perplexed by Alice Weidel's marriage, including the BBC, most German gays probably voted for the AfD. I don't know about that. This is a Spectator magazine editorial manager. SourceRomeo.com. What the hell? I don't know how reliable this information is. But speaking of which, I do want to get back to something important here. As I have warned, that the chatter from earlier that wished that I self is, of course, received a site-wide ban, unsurprisingly. That's an 8-year-old account that he burned for no reason. But anyway, one thing I want to mention here, okay? We got to talk about this. All right? Remember how I was telling you that time and time again, the Netanyahu administration has shown that they are not really afraid of the growth of the nationalist, fascist, and oftentimes even anti-Semitic movements in Europe. This is yet another great example of such. The far right in Germany, according to Haaretz reporting, is not regarded by Netanyahu government as a threat, but rather as a potential ally. For Israel, the AfD is the cherry on top, providing a platform to continue their shared crusade against Muslims and Palestinians. This is from a report that showed that the Foreign Ministry of Israel quietly started giving assurances to far-right parties all around Europe. Apparently, knowing full well that there was a momentum happening on the nationalist front in Europe, the Israeli government immediately worked to create allegiances with those guys, because obviously they do not care about anti-Semitism. They do not care about the growth of fascism. They actually benefit from it in their minds. They in the short-term period think that this is a beneficial allegiance. Okay? This is something that I've talked about extensively. It's additionally strange to me that people who are liberal Zionists don't understand that they are making allegiances with very dangerous people that will absolutely betray them. Okay? I get why Netanyahu would make these calculated decisions. He is, after all, a fascist. But there are plenty of liberal Zionists out there who don't understand that they're developing allegiances with some truly horrifying, repulsive individuals that do not see the world in the same way that they do, with the exception of Israel. Genuine question, why do people attack you instead of people like Ryan Grimm, Jeremy Scahill, The Intercept, Ken Kuppenstein, Democracy Now? All you do is relay what they're saying because they're not accessible content creators. You can't develop a parasocial hatred towards Jeremy Scahill unless he streamed all the time, in which case you probably could. It's fine though. I'll tank it. I mean, specifically in the drama sphere chatters, once again, because doing a YouTube drama video on Jeremy Scahill is not going to garner you millions of views. In the same way that if you're a coward, even though you're very obviously pro-Israel, but you're too cowardly to openly admit that, instead of saying that, what can you do? Disparage every pro-Palestinian voice. That way, you, in your mind, get to live the best of both worlds. You get to simultaneously say, I'm pro-Palestinian, guys, but these other pro-Palestinian voices, well, they're far too radical for me. Okay? When in fact, the ultimate goal there is for you to traffic your pro-Zionist opinions. And they oftentimes do come out. Okay? But that is the reality.